Emily Dawson wasn't the kind of person anyone noticed. She was quiet, polite, and always kept to herself. At Sonny's Burger Spot, where she worked the late-night shift, Emily was known as the dependable employee who never complained, no matter how tough the day got. She had a calm way about her that made customers feel at ease and co-workers trust her with the most stressful tasks. But what no one at Sonny's knew, what Emily had never told a soul, was that she carried a secret. Emily's older brother, Jake Dawson, was a national-level boxer. He wasn't just good at boxing, he was a rising star in the sport. Jake's fists were like iron, and his speed in the ring left his opponents stunned. Reporters called him the Lightning Fist. He had won championships and made headlines, but despite all his achievements, Jake stayed humble. He wasn't the type to show off or brag about his skills. Instead, he focused on training, pushing himself harder each day to reach new heights. Emily admired Jake more than anyone in the world. She'd watched him grow from an awkward teenager training in their backyard to a fierce competitor who inspired respect in every boxing arena he entered. But unlike her brother, Emily preferred to stay out of the spotlight. She was proud of Jake, but she didn't want to live in his shadow. At work, she was just Emily, the friendly cashier who could handle a rush of customers with a smile. It was a chilly Thursday night, and the restaurant was busier than usual. The smell of sizzling burgers filled the air, and the fryers hummed in the background. Emily worked the register, her hands moving quickly as she punched in orders. A line of customers stretched to the door, and the other employees scrambled to keep up. Emily stayed calm, her soft voice cutting through the noise as she reassured impatient customers. "Your order will be ready in just a moment," she said with a smile. Most people appreciated her kindness, but not everyone. A low rumble filled the parking lot, growing louder by the second. The sound of motorcycles echoed like thunder, turning heads inside the restaurant. Emily glanced out the window and saw a group of bikers pulling into the lot. There were 6 of them, all dressed in black leather jackets with patches that looked like skulls and flames. Their bikes were huge, polished chrome gleaming under the streetlights. Emily felt her chest tighten. She'd seen bikers before. Sometimes they came in late at night for coffee or fries, but this group looked different. They were loud, brash, and intimidating. The way they moved, laughing and shouting, made it clear they didn't care who they disturbed. The door swung open, and the bikers walked in like they owned the place. Conversations at nearby tables quieted. Customers exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Emily kept her head down, pretending to focus on the register. The leader of the group stepped up to the counter. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scruffy beard and a menacing smirk. His helmet dangled from his hand, and his boots made a heavy thud with each step. He looked Emily up and down, his gaze lingering long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Service here as slow as the people working it." His friends laughed, their voices echoing through the small restaurant. Emily's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "What can I get for you tonight?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The man leaned closer, his smirk widening. "Oh, we're gonna need the works, darling. Burgers, fries, shakes. And make it quick, we don't have all night." Emily nodded and started ringing up the order. The man kept talking, his tone growing louder and more obnoxious. "Hope you can handle all that, sweetheart. Wouldn't want you breaking a sweat." The bikers burst into laughter again, and Emily's cheeks flushed. She kept her eyes on the register, focusing on entering the order correctly. Behind her, one of the fry cooks muttered under his breath, "Jerks." Emily heard it but didn't react. She knew better than to engage with customers like these. Instead, she finished taking the order and handed the man his receipt. "Your food will be ready shortly," she said, forcing a smile. The man didn't move. Instead, he tapped his helmet on the counter, making a sharp, rhythmic sound. "You got a name, sweetheart?" he asked. Emily hesitated. She didn't want to answer, but she also didn't want to make the situation worse. "Emily," she said quietly. "Well, Emily," he said, leaning in even closer, "let's hope you're worth the wait." The bikers laughed again, and Emily turned away, her hands trembling slightly. She walked to the back to grab the order slip, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As she worked, the bikers grew louder. They started making rude comments about the food, the service, and even the other customers. One of them tossed a napkin onto the floor and laughed when an employee bent down to pick it up. Emily stayed focused on her task, but her stomach churned. She hated feeling helpless, hated that these men thought they could treat people however they wanted. For a brief moment, she thought about Jake. If he were here, he wouldn't let them get away with this. But Jake wasn't here. He was at the gym, training for his next big fight. Emily glanced at the clock on the wall. He was supposed to pick her up after her shift, but that was still an hour away. Just get through it, she told herself. They'll leave soon. But the bikers weren't in any hurry. They leaned against the counter, laughing and joking as if they owned the place. Their leader, still smirking, glanced around the restaurant and then back at Emily. "You guys do a great job here," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Really top-notch service." Emily didn't respond. She couldn't. All she could do was hope they'd get their food and leave before things got worse. But deep down, she had a feeling this night was far from over. Emily went to the back kitchen, doing her best to stay calm. The fryers hissed, the grill spat grease, and the other employees worked quickly to prepare the bikers' oversized order. But the atmosphere was tense, the usual hum of work replaced by nervous glances toward the counter. "Are they still out there?" one of her co-workers, a young guy named Tom, asked in a hushed voice. He was flipping patties, his hands moving fast but clumsily. Emily nodded without looking up. "Yeah. Let's just get their order done and hope they leave." Tom muttered something under his breath that Emily couldn't hear over the noise of the kitchen. She didn't ask him to repeat it. She just wanted to get through the night without more trouble. Back out in the dining area, the bikers were making themselves at home. Their leader leaned on the counter, still tapping his helmet in an annoying rhythm. One of his friends, a wiry man with tattoos running up his arms, started poking fun at the customers sitting near the windows. "Hey, buddy," he called out to a man eating a burger. "That meal looks like it's about to bite you back. Better watch out." The customer didn't respond, just lowered his head and kept eating. The bikers laughed like it was the funniest joke in the world. Emily peeked around the corner and saw the scene unfolding. Her heart sank. She could see the unease on the faces of the customers, the way they avoided looking at the bikers. The leader caught sight of her watching and smirked. "Hey, Emily. What's taking so long? Don't tell me you forgot how to flip a burger." The laughter rang out again, louder this time. Emily gritted her teeth and forced herself to step out from the kitchen. She didn't want them to think she was scared, even though her hands were shaking. "It'll be ready soon," she said, her voice as steady as she could make it. The leader raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "Soon, huh? We'll see about that." He reached across the counter and grabbed a handful of ketchup packets from the dispenser. Without breaking eye contact, he ripped one open and squirted it onto the counter. "Oops," he said mockingly. "Guess I made a mess. You better clean that up, sweetheart." Emily stared at the ketchup, her jaw tightening. She wanted to say something, to stand up for herself, but the words wouldn't come. She grabbed a napkin and wiped the counter, her movements quick and precise. "Good girl," the leader said, leaning back with a satisfied grin. Tom appeared behind her, holding a tray piled high with burgers, fries, and milkshakes. "Here's their order," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily took the tray and placed it on the counter. "Your food's ready," she said, stepping back. The leader eyed the tray and then looked at her. "What?" No smile. "Come on, Emily. A pretty girl like you should smile more." The other bikers hooted and hollered, their laughter filling the small restaurant. Emily clenched her fists at her sides but didn't respond. As the bikers grabbed their food and sat down at a corner table, Emily let out a shaky breath. She hoped they would eat quickly and leave, but she had a sinking feeling they weren't done causing trouble. Underscore 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 on. The bikers' table became the loudest spot in the restaurant. They laughed, talked loudly, and tossed crumpled napkins onto the floor. One of them spilled a milkshake, the sticky pink liquid spreading across the table and dripping onto the floor. "Oops," the wiry man said, grinning. "Guess we need another one of these." "Hey, Emily." Emily looked up from the register, her stomach sinking. She didn't want to go near them, but she didn't have much choice. She grabbed a rag and walked over to their table, avoiding eye contact. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The wiry man held up the empty milkshake cup. "Another one of these. And make it snappy." Emily nodded and turned to leave, but the leader reached out and grabbed her wrist. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Hold on," he said, his grip firm but not painful. "You're not going to walk away without saying please, are you?" His friends burst into laughter, and Emily's cheeks burned with humiliation. She pulled her wrist free and walked back to the counter without a word. The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man named Frank, came out of the office and surveyed the scene. His brow furrowed as he took in the bikers' behavior, but he didn't say anything. Frank was the kind of boss who avoided confrontation whenever possible. "Emily," he said quietly, motioning her over. "Are you okay?" She nodded quickly. "I'm fine. They're just being loud." Frank sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, let me know if it gets worse. We don't want any trouble." Emily wanted to laugh at the irony. Trouble was already here, and everyone in the restaurant could feel it. Underscore 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 on. Meanwhile, the bikers continued their antics. The wiry man got up and started wandering around the restaurant, commenting on people's food and making snide remarks. One of the other bikers tried to start the jukebox in the corner, kicking it when it didn't work. The customers were visibly uncomfortable. A young couple near the door finished their meal quickly and left without looking back. Emily glanced at the clock again. Only 30 minutes until Jake arrived. She didn't know what he would do when he saw this, but she couldn't wait for his presence. Just knowing he was nearby would make her feel safer. The leader of the bikers leaned back in his chair, his boots propped up on the table. He watched Emily as she moved behind the counter, a smug expression on his face. "She's got guts," he said to his friends. "I'll give her that." Most girls would have run off crying by now. Emily pretended not to hear him. She focused on cleaning the counter, wiping it down with slow, deliberate movements. "Hey, Emily," the leader called out again. "Why don't you take a break and sit with us? We don't bite much." The laughter that followed made her stomach churn. She turned her back to them, pretending to organize the condiments. But inside, a storm was brewing. Emily wasn't a fighter, but she wasn't weak either. She had grown up watching Jake train, learning from his discipline and determination. He always told her to stand her ground, to never let anyone make her feel small. And tonight, she was starting to feel like she couldn't take it anymore. The restaurant fell silent, the air thick with tension. The bikers had claimed the space like it was their own personal playground. Emily stood behind the counter, forcing a polite smile as she handed over their oversized order. Her hands trembled slightly, the fear creeping up her spine despite her best efforts to stay calm. But it wasn't fast enough for them. "Do I need to teach you how to do your job?" snapped the leader, leaning forward and slamming his ketchup-stained hands onto the counter. The sudden movement startled her, and the bottle of ketchup he held tipped over, spilling a thick red line across the register. The group burst into laughter, their voices echoing through the small diner like a pack of wolves finding their prey. Emily froze, her chest tightening. She glanced at the mess but didn't move to clean it up right away, her mind racing with what to do next. "Look at her face," one of the bikers howled, slapping the back of another. "I think we broke her already." The leader smirked and picked up a handful of fries from the tray. He tossed one onto the floor in front of the counter. "You missed a spot, sweetheart. Why don't you get that for us?" Emily's stomach churned. She could feel the eyes of the other customers on her, their silent discomfort mixing with her own. No one said a word. Most of them just stared at their food or their phones, pretending not to notice. Behind her, Tom, the fry cook, muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." But he didn't step forward. No one did. The bikers continued their antics, pushing Emily further with every passing moment. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the leader said, snapping his fingers in her direction. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Emily swallowed hard and finally moved. She grabbed a napkin, her hands shaking as she bent down to pick up the fry. As she stood back up, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the shiny surface of the register. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. But somewhere deep inside her, beneath the fear, a small spark was starting to flicker. It wasn't anger not yet, but something stronger than the panic that had been gripping her since the bikers arrived. She set the napkin on the counter and looked up. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The leader leaned back and laughed, tossing another fry into his mouth. "Yeah, how about some free drinks? You look like the generous type." One of his friends chimed in, "And maybe a smile while you're at it. You don't want us to think you're rude, do you?" Emily didn't respond. She turned to grab the soda cups, her back to the group. She could feel her co-workers watching her from the kitchen. None of them said anything, but their silence was heavy. She knew they were just as scared as she was. As she filled the cups, the leader grabbed a milkshake from the tray and dumped it onto the counter. The thick liquid spilled over the edges, pooling around the base of the register. "Oops," he said mockingly, feigning surprise. "Looks like I made another mess. Better clean that up, Emily." The bikers roared with laughter again, and Emily felt the spark inside her grow brighter. She grabbed a rag and wiped the counter, her movements quick and deliberate. "Good girl," the leader said, smirking as he leaned back in his chair. Emily clenched her teeth and forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't lose her temper, not now. Jake would be here soon. She glanced at the clock on the wall. He was supposed to pick her up after his training session, and it wasn't far off. Just a little longer, she thought, taking a deep breath as she finished cleaning up the spilled milkshake. Underscore 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 on. But the bikers weren't done. They seemed to feed off each other's energy, their taunts growing louder and crueler with every passing minute. "Hey, Emily," one of them called out from their table. "You ever think about getting a real job? Something that doesn't involve flipping burgers?" Another chimed in, "She probably likes it here. Can't handle anything harder, right?" The laughter that followed was sharp and mocking, cutting through the quiet murmurs of the other customers. Emily could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some glancing at the door as if debating whether to leave. The leader stood up and sauntered over to the counter, his boots thudding heavily against the floor. He leaned on the edge, his face inches from Emily's. "You know," he said, his voice low and menacing, "you're lucky we're such patient guys. Most people would have lost their temper by now with how slow you are." Emily met his gaze, her heart pounding. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't want to escalate the situation, but she also didn't want to let him think he could intimidate her. The leader smirked, clearly enjoying her silence. He picked up another ketchup packet and squeezed it onto the counter, the bright red sauce pooling in a sticky mess. "Better get that too," he said, stepping back and crossing his arms. Emily stared at the mess for a moment, her hands trembling. The spark inside her was now a steady flame, but she kept it under control. She grabbed the rag again and wiped up the ketchup, her movements deliberate and precise. The leader watched her, his smirk never fading. "That's a good girl," he said again, his tone dripping with mockery. Underscore 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 on. Behind her, the fry cook, Tom, stepped out of the kitchen. He looked at Emily, then at the bikers, and opened his mouth as if to say something. But he stopped himself, shaking his head and retreating back to the safety of the kitchen. Emily felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She understood why no one wanted to intervene. These men were dangerous, and standing up to them could lead to serious trouble. But the weight of handling it all on her own was almost too much to bear. The clock ticked loudly in the background, each second feeling like an eternity. Emily glanced at it again. 15 more minutes until Jake arrived. She clung to that thought like a lifeline. Jake wouldn't let them get away with this. He'd know exactly what to do. The bikers, meanwhile, showed no signs of leaving. They sprawled across their table, laughing and talking loudly as if they owned the place. One of them started flicking bits of paper at the customers sitting nearby, grinning every time someone flinched. The wiry man with tattoos stood up and wandered around the restaurant, making snide remarks to anyone who made eye contact. He stopped in front of an older man who was eating alone and leaned over his table. "Enjoying your meal?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The man didn't respond, keeping his eyes on his plate. The biker chuckled and straightened up, walking over to the jukebox in the corner. He kicked it once, then again, the loud bangs making everyone jump. "This thing's broken," he said, grinning. "Guess I'll have to provide my own music." He started humming loudly, the tune clashing with the quiet background music playing over the restaurant speakers. Underscore 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 on. Emily clenched her fists at her sides, her frustration mounting with every second. She was tired of feeling helpless, tired of the bikers treating her and everyone else like dirt. She glanced at the door, silently willing Jake to walk through it. She could almost hear his voice in her head, calm and steady. "Stand your ground, Em. Don't let anyone make you feel small." The spark inside her flared again, stronger this time. Emily took a deep breath and turned back to the counter. She didn't know how much longer she could hold out, but she wasn't going to let them break her. Not yet. The leader leaned against the counter again, tilting his head as he studied Emily. His smirk widened. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe," he paused, pretending to think, "you're just too scared to stand up for yourself." The others erupted into laughter, one of them slapping the table so hard the soda cups rattled. Emily's grip on the edge of the counter tightened. Her nails dug into the wood, and for a moment, she thought she might crack under the pressure. But instead of breaking, she held her ground. "Can I help you with anything else?" she asked, her voice steady and calm. The leader raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her attempt to stay professional. He reached across the counter and grabbed a straw from the dispenser, twirling it between his fingers. "Yeah," he said, leaning closer. "You can smile more. I mean, isn't that part of your job? Making your customers happy." Emily forced the corners of her lips upward into a tight, artificial smile. "There. Happy?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. The leader's smirk faltered for just a second before he recovered, chuckling under his breath. "Feisty, huh? I like that." He straightened up and tossed the straw onto the floor. "Oops," he said with a shrug. "Better get that too." The bikers laughed again, their voices grating against Emily's nerves. She didn't move this time, didn't reach for the straw or grab a rag. Instead, she stared at them, her expression blank but her heart racing. For a moment, the leader seemed caught off guard by her defiance. He narrowed his eyes, studying her like she was some kind of puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. "Something wrong?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, the door to the diner swung open with a loud creak. Jake Dawson stepped inside, his presence commanding attention without even trying. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, and his sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene in an instant. Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her brother was here. The bikers didn't notice him at first, too busy laughing and congratulating themselves on their latest round of insults. But when Jake took a step forward, the leader turned to look at him. "And who's this?" the leader asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Jake didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked over to the counter, his movements calm and deliberate. He placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, his touch reassuring. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Emily nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Jake turned his attention to the leader, his expression unreadable. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone even but carrying an edge that made the air in the diner feel heavier. The leader crossed his arms and smirked. "No problem at all, buddy. We're just having a little fun. Right, boys?" The other bikers chuckled nervously, their laughter lacking the confidence it had moments ago. Jake didn't smile. He didn't move. He just stood there, his presence alone enough to make the bikers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You done?" Jake asked, his voice as steady as a rock. The leader bristled, his smirk fading. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked as calm and collected as Jake. "Who do you think you are?" the leader demanded, taking a step closer. Jake didn't flinch. "I'm her brother," he said simply. The room went silent. The bikers exchanged glances, their confidence wavering. "Her brother, huh?" the leader said, trying to sound unfazed. "Well, good for you. But this ain't any of your business, pal." Jake's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, a hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You made it my business the second you messed with her." The leader hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond. The other bikers were watching him closely, waiting to see what he would do. Jake took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. "You're going to apologize to my sister, clean up your mess, and leave. Got it?" The leader laughed nervously, trying to regain his composure. "Or what?" he asked, his bravado sounding forced. Jake's smile widened, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that sent chills down your spine. "Or we find out how tough you really are," he said, his tone light but deadly serious. The leader took a step back, suddenly realizing that he was outmatched. He glanced at his friends, but none of them looked eager to back him up. "Fine," the leader said, his voice tight with frustration. He turned to Emily and muttered, "Sorry." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Try again," he said. The leader's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to say it louder. "I'm sorry." Jake nodded. "Good. Now clean up your mess." The leader hesitated, but one look at Jake was enough to convince him. He grabbed a handful of napkins and wiped the ketchup and milkshake off the counter, his movements quick and sloppy. When he was done, he tossed the napkins into the trash and looked back at Jake. "Happy now?" he asked, his tone bitter. Jake didn't respond. He just stepped aside, motioning toward the door. The leader muttered something under his breath as he walked out, the other bikers following close behind. The sound of their motorcycles starting up echoed through the parking lot before they finally sped away. The diner was silent for a moment before the other customers started clapping, their relief and gratitude evident. Emily looked up at Jake, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake smiled and pulled her into a hug. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "That's what brothers are for." The atmosphere inside the diner grew thicker with tension. The laughter of the bikers echoed off the walls, but Emily could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. They were all around her now, teasing her, pushing her to the edge. They hadn't quite figured it out yet, but Emily was no longer the same girl they'd first picked on when they stormed through the door. There was a shift in her posture, a spark in her eyes that they had missed until now. "Hey, sweetheart," the leader called again, stepping up behind the counter like he was claiming dominion over the place. His bulky frame made him seem even more intimidating as he leaned over toward Emily, the gap between them closing quickly. "Don't just stand there like a deer in headlights. You got a problem with us?" His voice was mocking, dripping with that sense of superiority only bullies know how to wield. Emily's back stiffened as she stepped away from the counter. The small part of her brain that was still scared, still trying to play it safe, screamed for her to give in. It told her to apologize, to beg them to leave, but that part was fading quickly. Instead, she felt the rush of something stronger pushing to the surface, something fierce, something that had been hiding deep inside for years. The leader smirked, clearly enjoying her unease. He took a few more steps forward, leaning in even closer, his breath hot on her face. "You're shaking, girl. You afraid of me?" But Emily didn't flinch. Her hands, which had been trembling only a moment ago, now clenched into fists. She looked up at the bikers surrounding her, their grins wide, their eyes full of amusement. But Emily saw them differently now. They weren't intimidating. They were just loud and weak in the ways that truly mattered. "Maybe you're the one who should be afraid," she said, her voice quiet but strong, surprising even herself. She didn't expect the words to leave her mouth, but once they were out, she felt the weight of them settle on her shoulders, like a shield. The leader paused. His grin faltered for the briefest of moments, and for a second, Emily thought he might back off. But then he threw his head back and laughed loudly. "What, you think you can do something about it?" he mocked, glancing over his shoulder to the other bikers. "What's a little girl like you gonna do?" They all laughed. The sound was harsh, echoing in the diner. But for Emily, it was just noise, background static that no longer held any power over her. In that moment, her eyes flicked to the corner of the room, where a framed newspaper clipping hung proudly on the wall. It was a photo of Jake. Her brother. There he was, his fists raised in victory, a smile on his face as he stood proudly beside a trophy. The headline beneath the photo read, "National Boxing Champion Jake Dawson wins again." It was the thing that Emily had always looked at when she needed a reminder of strength, of resilience. She had always felt proud of Jake, but now, looking at the image of her brother's triumph, a new sense of confidence began to flow through her veins. Emily wasn't just Jake's little sister. She wasn't just the girl behind the counter. She was someone with a legacy of strength, and no one, not even these bullies, could take that away from her. Her pulse steadied as she stared at the newspaper clipping. Jake had faced much harder challenges than this. His opponents had been stronger, faster, and far more ruthless. But Jake had always fought back. He didn't cower, and neither would she. The leader saw her gaze shift toward the wall and followed her line of sight. For a second, his expression changed just enough for Emily to notice. He seemed to catch the hint of something, a realization, perhaps. But before anything else could happen, he snapped his attention back to her. "You like looking at pictures of your big tough brother, huh?" he sneered, mocking her. "What's he gonna do, huh? He gonna come in here and save you?" Emily felt a rush of heat rise to her cheeks, but it wasn't from embarrassment, it was from something else. Something that had been buried inside for far too long. Anger. Pride. Loyalty. "Jake doesn't need to save me," she said, her voice low but firm. "But you're right about one thing. He's not far away." The leader laughed again, but it was nervous this time, as if he wasn't sure how to react. "Is that so?" he said, still trying to hold onto his bravado. "Well, if your brother's so tough, maybe I'll have to pay him a visit." The group chuckled again, but Emily wasn't paying attention to them anymore. She could feel the tension in her body building, the urge to fight back pushing her closer to the edge. But something inside of her knew that she didn't have to do it alone. She wasn't the scared girl they thought she was. "I don't need him to fight my battles," Emily said, her voice cutting through the noise in the diner. "I'm not some weak little thing you can push around. You don't get to walk in here and treat me like I'm nothing." The bikers stopped laughing. The air in the room shifted, becoming charged, as if the entire diner was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. One of the bikers, a tall man with a leather jacket and a large tattoo of a snake on his arm, leaned in closer. "What are you gonna do about it, huh?" he growled. Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she took a slow breath and met his gaze. There was fear, yes. But it was mixing now with something deeper, something stronger. She wasn't alone. She had strength within her, even if it wasn't the kind of strength they expected. And there was more to her story than they could imagine. That's when she heard the door open. Jake's voice rang out through the room, cutting through the tension like a knife. "What's going on here?" The bikers froze. Emily felt the rush of relief flood her chest, her fear suddenly evaporating. She didn't need to face them alone anymore. Her brother was here. And no one messed with Jake Dawson. She looked over at him, and their eyes met for the briefest of moments. She saw the calm, unwavering confidence in his gaze. It was the kind of look that told her everything was going to be okay. That no matter what, she wasn't alone. The leader of the bikers was the first to speak. "You got a problem with us, tough guy," he sneered. Jake stepped forward, his presence filling the room. There was no doubt in his movements, no hesitation. He was used to handling situations like this. He had trained his whole life for moments like these. "Actually," Jake said, his voice cutting through the tension, "I do have a problem. With you." The room seemed to shrink in on itself as the bikers all turned to face Jake. But Jake didn't flinch. He didn't even break a sweat. He was the one in control now. Emily stood tall behind the counter, watching her brother with pride. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about showing these bikers who they were messing with. And they were about to find out. The bikers were no longer laughing. The room had gone eerily quiet as all eyes turned to Jake, and Emily could feel the weight of their gaze upon her brother. The leader, still trying to hold onto his pride, straightened up and puffed out his chest, but Emily could see the hesitation in his eyes. Jake didn't just look strong, he looked unstoppable. There was no mistaking the aura of confidence that surrounded him. The leader, realizing his bravado wasn't working, tried to mask his uncertainty. "What's your problem, man?" he sneered. "This doesn't concern you." Jake took another step forward, his posture rigid, his voice steady and calm. "It does now," he said. "When you start harassing my sister, it becomes my business." Emily couldn't help but feel a rush of warmth in her chest at his words. For years, she had admired her brother from the sidelines, watching him fight his battles in the boxing ring. But now, standing next to him, she realized that Jake's strength wasn't just in his fists, it was in his ability to stand firm, even when facing down a group of intimidating men like these bikers. The leader scowled at Jake but didn't back down. "You really think you can take all of us on, tough guy?" he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. Jake's eyes narrowed, and Emily could see the change in his demeanor. The calm, measured man she had known her whole life was replaced by the fighter, the national champion who had stepped into the ring with some of the best athletes in the world. Emily knew then that Jake wasn't just her brother. He was a force to be reckoned with. "I don't need to take all of you on," Jake said quietly, but his words carried a weight that made even the leader flinch. "I just need to make sure you understand one thing: this isn't your place, and you're not welcome here anymore." The other bikers shifted uneasily, some looking at their leader for guidance, but the smirk was gone from the leader's face. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. Emily's heart raced as she saw him glance toward the exit, his fingers